Hello, everybody. This episode contains mild language and has some thematic elements that, depending on your personal beliefs and parenting style, may not be suitable for children under the age of 12. Keeping that in mind, as you ready your ears to participate in the story, I genuinely thank you for being here. Please join me after the episode for a brief discussion about the story. Without further ado, this is Short Stories with Stefan, Episode 10, Beauty Consumed. There once was a time when flowers bloomed like towering trees in an open meadow. There were once thousands of flowers in this natural habitat. But when the Great Hunger ravaged the earth, the natural flower disappeared in less than 5 years. It would take another 2 years before the house developed an artificial flower to consume. That was over 100 years ago, and there are few people alive who can even remember a naturally grown flower. Grant felt his heart grumble, because he hadn't consumed in almost a day. That was the norm for the impoverished, and he was aware of his situation. Today, he's going into the city to meet with a man about a potential new job. Don't fuck this up, Grant. I'm going out on a limb here getting you this meeting. You will wear this suit and you'll wear these shoes. If you trade any of these things in order to consume, it'll be the last time I help. The warning of his brother slithered through his head. He got into the cab his brother had called for him and headed into the city. It was an illustrious and boisterous place, a palace of art and detail mixed with giant buildings looking down at you like God. The streets were flooded with people in loud colors as they walked and consumed carelessly. This area was the opposite of the ghetto he called home. In the ghetto, you could only consume flowers, butterflies, or maybe an elegant photo if you were lucky. People who lived in the city were those who could afford to consume things that Grant had only ever dreamed of. His brother was a consumption agency officer, a CAO for short, and he was responsible for people who stole in order to consume. The people who were caught stealing were thrown into a cell and left to starve. Arriving at the building, Grant got out and headed in. He told the woman in bright pink at the front desk that he was there to meet with Mr. Stepping. She asked him to sit down and wait, and that Mr. Stepping was in a meeting, but he would be out in a moment. Grant felt his heart grumble again. He still hadn't consumed that day, and he was beginning to feel his heart murmur. He looked around, and he was quite certain that everything in the office he was waiting in, he could consume. However, if he did so, it would be stealing, and someone like his brother would see to it that he'd be isolated until he starved to death. His brother's voice was becoming quieter as the beauty of the room started to get louder and louder. Mr. Green, Grant Green, Mr. Stepping will see you now. Grant let out a breath of whole-body relief, but it did not stop his heart from pumping slower with hunger. He walked down a large hallway and then into a room that was painted violent red. It was the most beautiful red he'd ever seen. Mr. Stepping, sitting at his desk, called him over and asked him to sit down. Grant sat down in the chair, trying to ignore how soft it was, how the stitches were made, the extreme consideration, and how it folded around him like a blanket lusting after its holder. The beauty of it all was driving him mad. I understand you're Corey's brother. That's correct. He's a great guy. Saved my ass all through grad school. Yeah, he's good at that. There was a pause as Mr. Stepping pulled himself into his desk and rested his folded hands onto it. Look, I need a janitor who can start today. Are you able to do that? Grant replied with a vigorous nod. Good. We had to fire the last one. Mr. Stepping pulled a rose out of a drawer from his desk and consumed it right in front of Grant. Grant's heart was near implosion by now, and seeing the red flower while sitting in that dreadful red room on that heaven-sent red chair made him weak with hunger. Mr. Stepping stood up and shook Grant's hand. He showed him to the previous janitor's locker and gave him his uniform. Here you go, as a show of good faith for your first day. Then Mr. Stepping handed him the head and stem of a lily flower. Thank you, sir, said Grant, trying to control his body from falling into tremors with excitement. Mr. Stepping patted him on the back and left. After Grant got dressed, he put his hands inside the uniform's pockets and felt a piece of paper. He was filled with terror at the thought that maybe the previous janitor had left something he'd stolen. Grant thought he would be quick to report it to Mr. Stepping and show how committed he was to keeping his job. What he pulled out instead was a small piece of paper that had scribbled onto it, Room 324. He thought nothing of it and threw the note away. He wanted nothing to do with whatever the previous janitor had done. He knew that man's folly was not his future. He knew that this was his chance to escape the life he'd been dying to be free from. Months went by, and Grant was full of joy for the first time since he was a child. He began to start to know some of the staff, and they recognized him too. He made jokes with the front desk, and Mr. Stepping often left little things in his locker like photos of a sunset, sunflowers, and butterflies, all things that Grant could consume on his break. He began to make a steady income and was able to purchase things to consume with regularity. He hadn't gone hungry in months, and for the first time in his life, he knew things were going to be all right. Then one day he came into work and the whole building seemed to be buzzing about their new product. It was going to revolutionize the way people consume. Mr. Stepping himself was head of the project, and it was called Full Bloom. Grant hadn't a clue about what the mystery product might be, but the excitement in the air was contagious. Mr. Stepping was in such a great mood that he left a puppy in Grant's locker, a bright-eyed golden doodle whose fur was as soft as one imagines a cloud must be. Grant was beyond grateful as he consumed the puppy and felt his heart purr with delight and satisfaction. Grant did his normal route that day, cleaning the first 3 floors before stopping by Tiffany's desk to ask how her kids were liking their new school. Their conversations were full of laughs as Tiffany had a fast tongue and quick wit. Grant enjoyed her company, and today she was extra chipper due to the news of Project Full Bloom. While on the 5th floor, with only the 6th left to clean, Grant heard a commotion from the floor above. And since the 6th floor was home to the highest executives, it was not uncommon that game breaks ensued throughout the busy day. While on the 5th floor, he noticed that the doors to room 552 were wide open. There also appeared not to be a single person on the floor. He walked into the room and noticed that the rug in front of Mr. Carlyle's desk, to whom the office belonged, was ruffled and out of sorts. He went to fix the rug, but as he lifted it to return it to its place of peace, he saw a crack in the floor which he had not noticed before. The executive offices were often cleaner than any other floor combined, and Grant would only touch up 1 or 2 things. He pulled back the rug and revealed a large door. He reached down and pulled the door up, which illuminated a staircase. At first he thought he better not take one more step. But when one is alone, reason sometimes leads them all together. He walked down the stairs, wondering how such a passage could be hidden within a building like this one. While pondering this, he was quick to find himself at the bottom at a door, and on the door was the numbers 324. He thought back to his first day and the note in his pocket. He was flooded with regret at the thought he would be discovered like his predecessor and sentenced to starvation. Then he heard a noise behind the door, and it sounded like a person. His curiosity won out over his dread, and he opened the door. What he saw on the other side of door 324 caused his heart to roar with hunger. There, in front of his eyes, were rows of the most beautiful women and children he had ever seen. They were dressed in the most fantastic clothing and looked like they were made in a machine. Then he saw that each of them had a tag with a number and a note that read, Project Full Bloom. At once, it all became clear to him. This company had figured out a way to make the most beautiful thing known to man, the alluring and inescapable beauty of the woman and child. Their beauty radiated and his heart began to pump faster and faster. He felt sweat gathering around his cheeks and forehead. His lips twitched from side to side and his mouth became hot with saliva. Grant was overcome by the beauty of it all, and before he knew it, he was consuming. He consumed one after the other, not stopping to breathe, not stopping to think, not stopping at all. The bodies stood in simple form, watching as their neighbor was devoured into the heart of this man in a janitor's suit. Grant consumed at a ferocious speed. Then all at once, as if he had been frozen alive, he stopped. He gripped his chest and fell to a knee. As he felt air leave him, his skin began to swim with sensations and his face became hot with beating sweat. He tried to stand, tried to move, but he could only clench his fist to his chest. Grant had consumed more than his heart could handle, and after living off of the things he had, this rich moment was a Midas touch. His heart burst into 1,000 fragments as his clothes erupted off of his body. He fell to the floor, dead and pale, surrounded by the most beautiful things the world could create. "It worked," said Mr. Stepping as he moved out of the shadows and exposed himself to the light. "Start sending these to the scab neighborhoods at once. Their hearts aren't able to handle this much beauty. They'll consume themselves to death. Then we'll no longer have a great hunger to worry about ever again. With the lower consumers gone, all the beauty will be rightfully ours. It is long past due that our tolerance be rewarded." The executives gathered around Grant's lifeless body as they emerged one by one from the shadows. "Before these are all shipped out, though, Tiffany?" Tiffany stepped out from behind a woman with a red tag attached to her wrist. "Yes, sir," she said. "Please hire another janitor as soon as possible." Hello, everybody. Welcome to After the Story with me. Thanks again for listening, and wow, what a story. Beauty Consumed was born out of the idea of the label consumers, being a consumerist. We the consumer, and that whole idea, I just took it literally. I was like, what if we literally were consuming the things that we found to be valuable? And that final scene with what is perceived to be most valuable, women and children, is to me just kind of a wink and a nod to a patriarchal society that devalues those two things while saying at the same time that they are the most valuable thing on the planet. So yeah, it's just this weird dichotomy of what is acceptable and what we could become in the event of something so horrendous as like a massive famine that changes our entire worldview. But the character itself, yeah, he's representative of, the down and out, down on your luck. And I think what I wanted to communicate and what the themes that are trying to be pulled out of this story is not that rich people or executives or even like affluent communities are the problem or are this greater evil. It is merely that people who are in those positions can become twisted by the position and become something other than human. Because, yeah, I think you have to kind of set your humanity aside if you are planning a mass genocide, which sounds obvious. But it just seems to be a pattern in our history where some people, some small group of people, decide that another group of people are no longer valuable, and they scheme a way to eliminate those people. What worries me is that as we progress into whatever the next generation is in the future and all that jazz, and we got all this shit going on in the world, whether it be, whatever your perspective is on climate change, whatever your perspective is on the global economy, whatever your perspective is on global politics, right? We have all these things going on. And at the end of the day, we're hoping that people can be good, and that we're hoping that people can be their best selves. Unfortunately, hope is not always accurate to history. And if history has shown us anything, it's that unfortunately, the people who are drawn to the powerful positions that then make these horrible decisions, these inhumane decisions, could have been vetted earlier in the process. There are ways we can personality check for these problematic, narcissistic egomaniacs. They could have been weeded out earlier in the process. I'm thinking now for like CEOs or for political offices or for something as important as like a judge's seat. So these people that are in really powerful positions can be held accountable early on so that we don't have to find out their true colors way later on in the process. Because that's really what this story is, just a slow reveal of everybody's true colors. There's a brief moment of kumbaya where it seems like everything is going well, only for the rug to be pulled out from under your feet and you discover that, nope, actually, these guys had a game plan all along to use this poor janitor as a guinea pig, and he's not the first one, it would seem. Nor does it seem he will be the last. But all in all, it was a really fun story to write. The world that it exists in is very post-apocalyptic, and that's something that will kind of always be popular, I think, in our culture, because we are perplexed by this fantasy of the wasteland and how we could possibly survive and how we could get there. Obviously, we see that in our TV and movies and our literature, but it is something to consider, and it is something that we as a community and as a culture will probably eventually have to reckon with, whether it be nuclear war, because, I mean, let's be real, how long can everybody hold their trigger finger back? Or, to my previous point, how much longer until there's somebody who you can't convince to not pull the trigger? I don't know. It seems like it's kind of only a matter of time with the way that we have our checks and balances set up for our world leaders. But all that to say, there is room for optimism in our current position. We can still create systems that would be better at vetting out these problematic personalities, and we could create systems that would not allow for such intense wealth gaps that we currently have, as is highlighted in the sci-fi part of the story. That's not really science fiction, though. That's current reality of the giant wealth gap between the impoverished and the powerful. What would be the solution to close that wealth gap? Well, in my personal opinion, I think it would be education. I think we need to stop pushing this narrative of college being the only way, but we also need to stop pushing this narrative that the world would be better if we had more plumbers and more electricians. The world would just be better if we had more people who were informed and knew that, hey, like, what do you want? What do you value? Do you value a house? Do you value a family? Do you value travel? Do you value good food, eating out, creating, whatever it may be? You know, everybody has different values, and then picking a plan that best suits your values. Because let's say, hey, my dream is to just, have a family and build a home in my hometown. I love that. I would love to make that a reality, right? That's somebody's dream. It's not my dream, but it's somebody's dream. They don't have to go to college to do that. They don't have to even do a trades program. They could be an entrepreneur. They could start their own business. Or they could do a trade program, and then within a few years, honestly, those guys make really good money. It could be a reality. The point is to expand the scope, to broaden the lens to include a lot more creative options. Because when we say one size fits all, we get problems. And that's kind of the narrative of the story, is one size fits all. One size fits these powerful people, one size fits these not powerful people. And when we try to blanket statement problems, when we try to do things that would be the most bang for our buck, we end up losing the fact that we're all individuals. And while we are part of a whole, there are so many things about us individually that require individual attention, such as individual goal setting, individual mental health, right? We can think about these things on a group level, but when we zoom in, we really got to focus on how we can help people find, love, and accept themselves. And when they do that, I think that we will see a smaller and smaller gap between the powerful and the less powerful. Because power, in a lot of senses, is perspective. The perspective of what power you perceive you have. All in all, I really enjoyed this story, and I hope you did too. And thank you again, as always, for joining me after the story. And I thank you for joining me with Short Stories with Stefan, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.